Hello, good morning. How's everyone doing today?
Good morning. Doing well.
Good morning.
Hi, everyone. So again, just a reminder, please turn on your video if you can, and you can always feel free to turn it off if you need to. Okay, so at the end of last week, we have touched upon forces. So this is our second big topic of the semester. We've talked about all the forces we're going to discuss in this semester. Those are gravity, right? We have normal force, two kinds of friction, and static friction and kinetic friction. We also have force from the spring. We also have force exerted by rope, that's tension. So today we will continue to talk about different properties of forces and how do we draw a force diagram to help us analyze the problem. So previously in kinematics, we draw a motion diagram, right? It's just a way to represent the information we're given. And here when we have forces, we're going to draw a force diagram. So first, let's look at some properties of forces. The first of them is the force acts on an object, always by another object. We will call the agent of a force. For example, you're sitting on your chair right now. There is a normal force from the chair to you, is supporting you. So we will say, in this case, the force acting on you is by the chair. So the chair is the agent right now. Or the gravity. Earth is pulling on us right now with a force downward, that's gravity. So the agent in this case will be the earth and the force is acting on you. Okay, so that's the first property. The second one is force is a vector. We all know that already. It has both magnitude and direction. So you have to not only tell people how much strength you're using, you also have to say in what direction you're applying that strength, right? The third and the fourth has to do whether it's a contact force or long range force. We have talked about this already. Gravity would be the only long range force in this semester in the sense that it does not require contact. Anything else will require contact. Normal force, you have to touch the surface in order to have the force, right? Friction, you have to touch the surface. For rope, you have to touch the rope. For a spring, you have to touch the spring. Okay, there's a question, would long range force be the same as field force? So the idea, so the field is an idea we come up with in classical physics to describe something sort of long range. In other words, people in the past already also said it's action over a distance. But it's not a separate force, not a field force. You can look at, for example, in electricity, we talked about the electric field. We talked about the magnetic field. So fields and forces are all very physical. There is no difference which one is more fundamental. They're all very fundamental. So what you can describe the force is by saying, okay, gravity is exerting a force on me. Or if you want to use the field perspective, you're saying I'm in the field of gravity, I'm in a gravitational field, and therefore that field exert a force on me. Both of those works. In electricity, you can say this charge is repelling this charge, right? That's a force. Or you can say this charge produced a field around it, and this other charge is under the field, so this charge feel that force. So field is just a way for us to describe the influences. It's not really a new force. So just wanted to reply to that question. Okay, so now let's analyze the forces. Before we do that, I want to give you a few simple steps, just like how we did in our motion diagram. For these forces, we call them free body diagram. So the word free means that you free the object from its surroundings. First, you want to see which object you're interested in. You isolate the object. In this case, what force is acting on this weight? So this is a 1 ton of weight, right? It's literally a ton of weight. It's a very heavy object. And your interest is in this weight. So you're going to isolate it. And the second step, think about in what other object this object is in contact with or interact with. Either touching, for all the other forces, you need to have a contact. Only for gravity, you don't. Okay. So it's it interacts with the earth, so you have gravity. It is contacting with the floor, so you have normal force, right? It is also in contact with the tension, with the rope, so you have tension. And think about all the possible forces that might go into this free body diagram, and then draw them. So if we follow the steps of isolate the object, think about what other object the object has contact or interaction with. And then 3 is let's just simply draw all of those forces down. So you can see that the free body diagram for this weight is already drawn here. I label my positive X and Y like this. So you have gravity going down, pointing down. So we will draw an arrow and we'll label that as gravity. Now, when you actually draw a free body diagram, your problems, you will say F of G or weight W as a label to represent gravity. So you also have normal force pointing upward. It's perpendicular to your surface. In this case, my surface is level, horizontal. So the perpendicular direction is simply just being in the Y upward direction. So that's the normal force. You will write F normal, F of N or capital N to represent it. Then you have force by the rope. That's the tension. Also notice that put a friction on it. Because a lot of those are implied in the problem. They don't necessarily always tell you, but they will be implied. For example, you'll say you're pulling on a ton of weight and the weight doesn't move. So of course there has to be static friction, right? Otherwise the weight will accelerate in the direction you are applying the force. So there has to be a static friction, balance the force by the rope so that it does not have any acceleration. I will talk more about that when we do Newton's second law. So this would be your force diagram, a free body diagram. Free body meaning that you're really just isolating this object and looking only at this object but nothing else. All right, so let's look at a really quick question to check on if we know how to draw a free body diagram. It's very simple. Here you have a block. Is at rest on a horizontal surface, is frictionless, does not have any friction. Which one of these sketch is the correct free body diagram for the block? Okay. So for this one, I will just go ahead and let vote directly. I don't think too much of discussion is required. Later on, we will have a discussion in breakout room. So for this one, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and put in your vote. Okay, 10 more seconds. It looks like we have gathered majority of the vote already. Just 10 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this. Any last minute vote? Okay. All right, so we have pretty much a agreement on one of these sketches. So here, to draw the free body diagram, what are our 3 steps? The first step is to isolate the object. So isolate the object. And in this case, the object that we're interested in is a block. So let's put our attention on the block, right? Just put our attention on it. And the second step is to, in what other objects that the block is having interaction with. So in this case, and then depending on what objects that the block interact with, we will draw and label the forces. So let's do them one by one. Can you give one other object that is interacting with this block?
Ground.
The ground, you said?
Yeah.
So
Or
would
the surface.
would be the surface. Okay, very good. And because of that contact, it will exert what kind of force on the object?
Normal force.
A
So
normal
the upward force.
Normal force, very good. And then which way would the normal force be pointing?
Up.
It would be this way. And is there any other object that it has contact with or interacts with?
Gravity.
Gravity, even though it's not contacting, it still is under the influence of gravity. So you'll write F of G or weight to represent that force. Very good. So these are 2 that's in the perpendicular direction. Do I have anything in the horizontal direction? Like, do I have anything here or here?
No.
No, because it doesn't really say in contact with anything else. So it's really just A is correct. So now let's look at something slightly different. Now everything is moved on the ramp. So the block is sliding down. And it's also tell us it's frictionless surface. So which one of these sketch would be correct? Okay, so this one I'll give you a couple minutes to discuss. Please take a screenshot of the question before you head out to your breakout rooms.
Professor, when you have a second, could you go up to the steps you wrote down for how to do the free body diagram?
Oh, here?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, I got it.
What are some thoughts here? Do you guys have a discussion?
Not yet, but I can go first. So for this one, I believe that there are 3 forces in play. One being the normal, which is perpendicular to the object. And then we have gravity.
Okay.
And then we have the object sliding along the slope of the plane. So for me, I pick A.
Okay. Thank you. And what about the rest of you? What do you think?
Actually, I think that it's only two forces acting on it. So I think it's D, gravity and normal force, because if you look at gravity, it's in a different direction than the normal force. So part of that gravitational force is actually the reason why it's moving downwards, because it's at an angle. So part of the gravitational force is moving parallel to the normal force, and part of it's actually the one moving actually moving it down the ramp. So that's what I think. So I think it's D.
Okay, thank you, Julian and Jacob, and all of you also who voted through the text. Yes, I think when you think about a block sliding down, it's very natural to think about whether there may be a force along the ramp. But like I said, when we draw a free-body diagram, we wanted to isolate all the objects that the block have contact with. So you need to be able to think of, okay, then what is the agent that is given that force sliding down? If you could not isolate and find an agent, maybe there would not be a force there, right? So I'm going back right now, but I'll bring everybody back shortly. I'll see you guys pretty soon, okay? Looks like we have a majority of our votes. Just 10 more seconds. If you haven't voted already, please do so. All right, any last minute vote? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close this so we can take a look. So this is our results. We have quite a split between choice A and choice D. And it looks like we agree on two forces, right? So let's look at the forces that we do agree on. So the steps of drawing a free body diagram is, the first step is what? Is isolate the object and isolate the block. We want the block. Okay, the second steps is to look at what are the objects the block is either contact or the gravity, the only one that does not have contact with. So we might as well always put gravity first and then think about which other object has contact with. So how do I draw this gravitational force? Which of these arrows is correct? I believe that both A and D have this arrow directly downward, right? You guys didn't choose for C because we know gravity is always downward. Yes, so the one that's downward is always gravity. I'm gonna say F of G as in gravitational force. Okay, so other than that, the block is in contact with what other object?
Inclined plane.
It's the inclined plane, right? There's nothing else. So the inclined plane will provide what kind of force for the block?
Normal force.
It's a normal force. And then in which direction?
Perpendicular to the inclined plane, but like more upwards, not perpendicular downwards.
Okay, so perpendicular to the inclined plane upward. So this is a correct representation. It's the normal force, or you can say normal, capital N. Very good. So other than those two forces, do I have another force?
No,
Okay, so don't I need a force so that the block can go down though?
the block will go down because the normal force and the gravitational force are kind of like unbalanced. They're at an angle, so it'll move. It doesn't need that one.
Oh, normal force and gravity is not completely balanced. Very good. So there is an unbalanced force. Give it, certainly will change the motion of the block as Newton's first law is saying. Very good. So really, I just have those two. Later on, we will talk about viewing this third force. You can view it as the normal force and gravity combined, because if you use the head to tail method, you can see gravity and normal force, they will add up to this total force is along the ramp, right? So this is just a total force. You don't have to draw it separately. Or sometimes we draw this as a component of gravity. So gravity is effectively, you can view this as one component down the ramp and one component perpendicular to the ramp. The one that is perpendicular to the ramp get canceled by normal force, and the one that is down the ramp gives speed, make the block speed up along the ramp, right? So either way, this is not a separate new force. That's why we do not draw it. Okay, so if you have gravity, you don't draw a separate component of gravity. So D is correct. So you can see that we have already in the previous example looked at the effect of both normal force and gravity, right? So because force is like a vector, when you have multiple of them, they add up, just like how vectors add up. So you have the superposition of forces. It's obey the superposition principle that they follow the vector addition. We know how to do vector addition, so we can add up forces just by treating them as vectors. So if you have an object, there are a bunch of forces acting on the same object, then you need to look at overall, what is the total force? What is the net, or you can say, what is the net force? And then you can figure out the motion of the object accordingly. So applying this one net force is the same effect as if you have all the other forces. So some of you may have done the lab, 1510 lab, the vector addition, if you did it as Thursday or Friday lab. If not, you might do it this week. Then in the lab, we set up different weights, right? We're saying, okay, you have a weight hanging this way, you have another weight hanging that way. The overall of those is equivalent. You have a third one hanging the opposite way, so they balance it out. Applying this one net force is the same effect as applying all the other little forces together. So let's look at this question. Here inside an elevator, you have a mass hanging from the ceiling of an elevator, and the elevator is accelerating upward. Okay, so we wanted to be able to compare tension to the strength. Here, we're not going to apply Newton's second law yet because we haven't learned it, but we wanted to get a qualitative sense of how the balance or non-balance of the forces can affect the motion of object, and will help us later on to learn Newton's second law. So if the forces are balanced, you can say if you have someone exert 5 newtons this way and another 5 newtons this way, okay, then it is balanced, or like tug of war. If the force this side and the force on the other side is exactly the same, then the object is not going to accelerate in either direction, right? Pretty much balanced. In this case, if you have this mass is simply hanging in the elevator and elevator is not going anywhere, right? Then you will think, okay, this object that I'm interested in, if gravity is 10 pounds, for example, then the tension must also be 10 pounds. In this case, it is balanced. So you can see here, I have two forces. I do a vector addition with one up, one down. The vector sum is 0. So it's balanced. So think about how T and the weight of the object. So here, the weight of an object is represented by mg. We'll talk about that later. How do they have to compare to each other if the elevator is accelerating upward? Okay, so I'm going to let you vote on this. Okay. Any last minute vote? Let's go for 10 more seconds. If you haven't voted already, please do so. Okay, any else? Any more votes? All right, if not, I'll go ahead and share the results with you. This is our results. We have slightly preference for A, where tension and the weight of the object is balanced. All right. So what does Newton's first law say? Can anybody still remember and be able to repeat Newton's first law for us?
All objects have a resistance to change mode. Well, all objects will stay in the with the same motion unless an outside force acts on them, and that ability to essentially resist changing movement is an object's mass.
Very good one, very good. Thank you, that's excellent. An object stay at rest will stay at rest. An object that's already in motion will remain that same motion, meaning that velocity will remain the same direction and magnitude, unless an unbalanced force is acting on it. So if the tension and the weight of the object are balanced, like the situation I'm drawing here, the sum of the forces are 0, then I would say this object will not change its status of motion. It will remain the same speed, and let's say traveling 5 miles per hour. It will remain that speed unless it's unbalanced. So is little m traveling with a constant speed? So that is the next question is m traveling with a constant velocity? Or is it accelerating?
Well, it does say accelerating upwards, so m can't have a constant speed.
Yes, the whole elevator is accelerating upward. So if you have something is accelerating like the truck, a car, an elevator, then everything inside is all accelerating the same. If they were not, then you're going to have the different parts moving at different speed. But if it's all accelerating together, then it is certainly all accelerating with the same A. So even if it doesn't tell you specifically, the little mass is accelerating with the same A, as long as it's saying it is inside the elevator is accelerating, that is telling you the mass in it is also accelerating. Like if you're in the truck is accelerating, it is saying that you are also having the same acceleration. So that may not be explicit, but it's implied in the problem. So you can see it is accelerating together with the elevator upward, then the force must be unbalanced, right? That we can get directly from Newton's first law. How the force can be unbalanced, with the upward force bigger than the downward force, or the upward force smaller than the downward force?
I would say that the upward force has to be bigger than the downward force because we're accelerating upwards. And from the pre-lectures, we learned that like a force causes an acceleration, not really an acceleration causing a force. So if you want upwards movement, your net force has to be upwards. So the upward force has to be bigger than the downward force.
Very good one, thank you. You can see this is explained in the pre-lecture, this is Newton's second law, but also very intuitive that if your upward force is stronger, then the whole object will change its motion, will speed up in the whichever is stronger direction. So we'll speed upward. So acceleration is upward, so tension will have to be bigger than the gravity in order for that to happen, right? So we know it's B is correct. So this is Newton's first law. If an object act on by no net force, okay, will maintain that same velocity. So a lot of times if they tell you a body is moving at a constant velocity, that is telling you there is no net force acting on it. So in other words, if there are multiple forces acting on it, then these forces must have balanced out each other. So no net force. No net force doesn't mean no force, it means no overall sum of the forces, right? Okay, so let's continue to answer a couple questions just to help us make sure we understand how to apply Newton's first law. Again, we have the same person pulling on the ton of weight. In this case, indeed, the weight has a velocity, so it must be some kind of Superman pulling on the weight train. Anyway, it has a v, constant velocity traveling to the left. Okay, so what is the direction of the net force acting on the weight? So I'll give you guys a couple of, maybe it won't take a couple minutes, maybe a minute and a half to discuss this question. I'm just stopping by different breakout rooms, and maybe I only have time to stop by one at most, but hopefully while rotating I could get a chance to talk to you in the breakout room. All right, so take a screenshot before you leave, and then you can accept the invitation to go in.
Okay then. Yeah.
I say left because if it's moving in that direction, the the sum of the forces has to be in that direction, right?
Yeah, because there's nothing else there than the gravity and normal force acting on, and those two seem to cancel out here.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
I'm
so
gonna say-
Brian and Jonathan, you were saying that since the object is moving to the left, then the total force should be to the left. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the sum
The
the
sum.
sum of it. Yeah.
Okay, so you were getting at sort of the beginning of everything, sort of like you're trying to get the beginning of the story. For example, if the weight was arrangement there and is at rest, to get it from at rest to moving, you certainly needed an acceleration. To have that, yes, I agree. At some point, you should have had a net force to the left. But here we're asking, the question is asking about a snapshot. You don't know how long have happened since your first start pulling on it. It's really just at this instant. What is asking is a weight is being pulled and it's traveling at a constant speed. Okay, so what did we just talk about here in Newton's first law? A body moving at constant velocity has no net force on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now going back, would you say your answer will change then?
It would have to be 0 in that case then.
How's it moving
Right.
without any net force?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Oh, it's just like how is it moving without any net force? It has 0 net force. So how is it moving in any direction?
It's an excellent question. How does it move? It doesn't need anything to move. Once it's moving, it will always be moving unless it's being stopped. So that's Newton's first law. So being able to move is a given. Is unless if there's no reason to stop, it's not going to stop. The thing is, in real life, our intuition really counters that because in real life, we always have friction. So when something starts moving, there's always an unbalanced force on it because that's always friction or air drag that to slow it down. So in real life, to counterbalance that friction, you always needed to give it some force. But in physics, when we're dealing with so my point is, even if there is friction here, you're pulling on it, as long as you're balancing out friction, you have a 0 total force. That constant velocity will still remain at constant velocity. It will not slow down unless your force that you provide is smaller than the friction, then it will slow down. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I get it. So
Right.
in this case, it's not saying like it stopped or anything, or it just says it's moving constantly. We say the net force is 0, right?
Yes, that's all you care right now for the net.
Okay.
All
I
right, see you
see.
guys in a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, so people have already come back from the breakout rooms. Please put in your vote. It could either be a result of your discussion or it could just be your own thoughts, whichever you would like to put in for your vote. All right, 10 more seconds. Let's go run for 10 more seconds. All right, any last minute vote? I'm going to end the poll and let's take a look at our results. All right, so the majority are voted for E and the second majority is to the left. So how do we go about answering this question? Anybody would like to share their thoughts?
So for the up and down force, kind of like when we walk, we don't fall through the ground. I'm just going to assume that the normal force and gravity cancel each other out, especially because the velocity vector is pointing purely to the left, so completely horizontal. So that's how I came to that conclusion. And because the guy is just pulling with the rope to the left, like because he's leaning back and stuff, and because the velocity vector is to the left, I picked C to the left.
Okay, so we're all good with force, normal force and gravity balance each other out. Nothing is interesting going on there. Great. And there is, okay, so I think what you're saying, Juan, was that the guy is pulling on the left for sure. We should have a tension on the left. But if we draw the free body diagram, would that be a complete free body diagram? Would that be correct?
You also need friction.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other problem said frictionless and this one didn't. So I wasn't sure what to do about that if we were going to go with a normal way of doing it.
Okay, so you guys said we should add friction, but when it doesn't really tell us whether it is a frictionless or there is friction surface, is there any other information in this problem statement that tell us there's for sure friction?
Well, if the weight's being pulled and it's also being pulled at a constant speed and not accelerating, there's got to be some sort of force that's acting against the pulling.
So if there isn't a friction, we know it will be accelerating, not a constant speed. the fact it is a constant speed, not only I have friction, and can you tell me how do I draw the friction? Is it a little bit short arrow? Or is it as long as my tension?
It'll be equal to the tension.
It will be equal length to the tension. So friction is equal magnitude and opposite direction to the tension. So friction and tension cancel out, just like gravity and normal force cancel out. And is that okay? Would you worry that, well, if they all cancel out, is it okay? It's still moving with a constant speed? It is okay, because Newton's first law is saying, well, the object that slows down, if it's moving with velocity v, will remain that velocity v unless it's being slowed down or being stopped by an unbalanced force. So if you don't have anything net force to stop it, it's going to continue that speed forever, right? In real life, we always need a little push to keep something from keep it going, is because we always have friction and air resistance, right? But if you can build an ideal ice track or frictionless track, then little push, it will continue to go on for a long time, if not forever, right? If it's really frictionless, if it's really drag-free, without air resistance, it's going to go on forever with that constant speed. It only slows down when there is a force. So that's why a lot of this is maybe our intuition actually hinders our choice here, because our intuition right now always want us to have a force to keep it moving. You don't need a force to keep it moving. It will keep moving by itself unless there is an external force to act on it. But if you have friction, then yes, you do need to balance that friction to maintain the constant speed. So the answer is 0. All you care is when you see constant speed, right away, you know acceleration is 0, net force is 0. So this would be F net, or the sum of all the forces, we use the sum to represent it. So as long as you see constant speed, you know these two conditions are true, okay? One last question. Just really to get the idea of Newton's first law in us. So you put your book on the bus. This is something example we kind of talked about earlier, where you had a sudden brake, right? And that going forward motion that you feel relative to the car. So when the bus stops suddenly, the book slides forward off the seat. How do we explain this? Which of this is the best way to explain it? I'll just go ahead and let you vote here.
I want.
Yes, you have a question? Does someone have a question? All right, since we're running out of time, I want to give you just 10 more seconds and then we can wrap this up. Just 10 more seconds. All right, any last minute vote? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this. Let's take a look at our results. So the popular answers are A, a net force acting on it to make it move off the seat, or B, it remained moving. So how do we use Newton's first law to explain this phenomenon? So Newton's first
Um,
law says, go ahead, Grant.
The book was in motion, and then when the bus stopped, the book remained in motion until it like, I don't know, hits the floor, or like hits something else, but it's going to remain in motion until it's like directly stopped.
Very good, excellent. It simply is not a net force causing it to move off the seat. It is only relative to the bus. It is still remain moving. The bus has slowed down. The brake on the bus made the bus to change its status of motion, but there isn't enough of a net force to change the status of the book, right? So that's why the book continued to move as compared to the bus. It seems to be, well, it is moving off the seat because simply remain that speed. Now, if your book is really, really heavy, then the friction between the book and the seat will be enough so that it will slow down together as a bus. In that case, it will not slide off the seat, right? So simply it remained the motion because of the what we know about Newton's first law. All right, so that's all for today. On Wednesday, we will start talking about Newton's second law and put the forces and the acceleration together to predict more about motion. All right, see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good rest of the day.
I had a question, Professor.
Yes.
I'm still kind of lost. So then, since the book remained in motion because of the bus's constant velocity, why is it that I'm just kind of a little bit lost with the analogy here?
Here, you don't really care about constant velocity or non-constant velocity. It is whichever status of motion that you were in. Or yes, okay, the bus was driving, let's say 50 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour. And that was a constant velocity. The book is traveling with that same constant velocity. So all bus, including the bus and the book, will continue that velocity forever until there is a unbalanced force. In this case, you hit the brake, the bus driver hit the brake. So that unbalanced force is changing the status of the bus, making it to slow down and stops completely, stops or slow down. But the book doesn't have that force, right? So the book will remain that same 30 miles per hour unless it's being acted upon by another force. In this case, it will hit the floor and eventually stop that. It will eventually slow down, right?
Okay, so then another force is not acting on it until it eventually gets to the floor, correct?
Get to the floor, yeah. But if the book is heavy enough, then the static friction will be enough to slow it down. And
Okay.
in this scenario, it's not enough to slow it down, so it flies off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, of course. All right, I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Professor, have a good day.
Bye, have a good day yourself.
Thank you.